Hey folks, this is The Reset. I am Rebecca Hargraves. I'm joined with Cameron Macgregor as always, and we're doing something a little bit different today. We're always trying to increase audience interaction. So we're doing something of a Q&A this week. I put a post out on Twitter, and of course we'll answer super chats as well. I just want to know what you tap into what the public consciousness is saying and thinking and asking, and I thought this would be a good way to do this. Actually, this was Cameron's idea. I'll give you credit where credit is due.
Well, I mean, we do have to ask the audience questions. I can't just go on tirades or go into somebody in the comments. I did read them last week, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, said it was demon mode. So I can't just go into demon mode on the show. And you're exactly right. Rebecca and I, our view is, as I think you guys know, and our effort in all of this is to build in the real world. And that means to tap into a real world connection with all of you folks, some of whom we met when we were in New York. And I don't know what I expected. I thought I would see some slithering simps come in, but that's not who was there. A lot of the guys that showed up to the event in New York, they were rock solid.
Yep.
So I'm sure most of you are as well. And that's why we want to hear from you guys.
Absolutely. And that leads into our first question from Wolf Shields Films. I'd like to hear more about your plans and what you envision for future IRL events. Cameron is the man to answer this question. He's the man with a plan.
So we decided to piggyback, Rebecca and I, that is, to piggyback on an event that a friend of mine, Konstantin von Hofmeister, wanted to schedule in New York City or DC. We didn't exactly know where the venue would be, but we decided to piggyback on that event, not just to come together as a group, which was good. And there were other folks there like Adam, Adam Mainstream Dissident. Is that his handle, Rebecca?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it
yes.
is. The most positive, Pollyannish guy I think I've met in some time. So Adam, if you're out there, we love you. But Adam was there. There were a lot of good folks there. But we wanted to see if we could create a sort of proof of concept, and that's a fancy way of saying we wanted to do something very small that wasn't
a template. Yes,
that's right. That wasn't specifically focused on Rebecca and me or a national movement or something so grandiose, but to test the waters and see if there was real enthusiasm. Because as I have said to you guys many, many times, it's really the audience that decides these things. It is. We get on here, we go through our little spiel, we do the best we can to prepare. Rebecca and I put a lot of hours in to do so, but you guys decide. You really do. So I think the result of that demonstrated, at least it did to me, I'm curious to hear what Rebecca said, a couple things. One is that the dynamic in this country is changing. That I do think in some very profound ways, people are ready to connect today, tomorrow, next week, next year in ways that they simply weren't even 4 or 5 years ago. So that's the first takeaway. The second is that when events happen in the real world, and I've done events my whole life, I did a lot of them in the business world. You do a lot of various things, particularly if you do sales. I did them when I worked in politics briefly. I did them when I was in the military. I did a lot of group-oriented things. And unfortunately, in the business world, a lot of that is diluted garbage, trust falls, something backs, this kind of bullshit. But some of these activities are very powerful and they can electrify. So the second thing I took away is that there are some things that we can do to tap into that willingness to connect, to electrify a sort of a neural network, if you will, of folks that want to connect in the real world. So in September, we are kicking off a broader meeting of minds, of folks, to begin the process of planning something much bigger next year. Now, I don't want to overstate or overpromise because it's not my way, as I think most of you know, but I think that this country is ready for a very, very big event. Something that we've never really done before, aside from something like Woodstock, which I've talked about before. But I think that there's a lot of fragmentation that can be overcome if we get in a room together and hash these things out. Now, I think there's some other productive deliverables that can come out of that, and I'll address that at a future time. But for the time being, it's going to require a lot of planning, a lot of activity, a lot of people involved in this. Not exclusively political folks either. Not people that have large audiences on Twitter, but people that are in difficult spots that want to do something, that want to participate in something bigger. Those folks are going to be involved. So if you're interested in this, you can certainly send a direct message or DM to Rebecca and get on the list, because we are generating such a thing. So those are all the details I'm prepared to share right now. Aside from one more, I'll say, I want to do this somewhere out in the Mountain West. That's where I want to do it. I do not want to do it on the East Coast.
No, indeed.
I don't want to do it on the West Coast. I don't want to do it in a big city. I want to do it somewhere where there's a little bit of history, but also where history can be made. Because there is a kind of theater to things, folks, that are necessary to activate energy, to get the animal spirits, as I like to say, shaken up so that we can start to build something in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised by the quality. Not that I think that I thought that there were going to be, low quality people there, but mostly it was just intellectually curious people that were looking to make in real life physical connections with other people and have discussion. And I thought that was so encouraging. Something about events, though, that I don't think most people know, like you can't throw these things together. We only had 60 people there, and it took a concerted effort between the four of us for months on a weekly basis to get this together. So the magnitude of what you're discussing is not irrelevant. Like, it is very difficult to do these things. But I think we can all see that the movement is in a slowing period. None of us are yielding the results from social media that we want to. It feels like we're in a rut. And a lot of us are just skating by on the credibility that we achieved during the initial Trump presidency, just like I am. And I'm aware of that. Like, I'm a product of this OG Trump movement. And it feels like there needs to be some sort of genesis. It feels like we need to be taking the next step. And I do believe that is going to be people making real connections in life. I don't really see what else it could possibly be.
Yeah, just two quick things, and then we'll move on because I know there's other questions. A kind of psychical transformation started in this country. I think it really happened after the global financial crisis in 2008. In fact, I'm making a video talking about this in somewhat more detail. You could argue, and I've made videos about this too, that 2000 was a very pivotal year. And if you go back to 1999, and I was in high school at the time, we had the Columbine shooting. And a lot of you younger folks don't remember that at all. That was a pivotal moment in this country's history. It really was. I remember going into an auditorium, all the students were assembled, and people were shocked. And the reason they were shocked is because nobody had ever heard of anything like that happening before. That was one. But second is there was, even though it was unstated, there was no way to articulate it at the time, but there was something very wrong with our society, and everybody recognized it, that allowed such a catastrophe to happen. And for those of you who do not know, Columbine was a school shooting. It was the first major school shooting of its time. And the kids who carried it out essentially imitated the Matrix, the film The Matrix. They got up in this sort of black, these black outfits and gear, and they were fully strapped. And it was devastating. It killed a lot of people. And like I said, it shocked the world. And I do think that's an important moment alchemically in this country. But all that is to say that today, that a lot of the psychical work, the sort of collateral damage, we have dealt with that online. That has been done. That shadow work is complete. Now we've got to transform it in the real world. The second thing I'll say just briefly is, anybody that's done anything in the real world, and I've spent most of my life doing just that, knows that what MJ DeMarco said. MJ DeMarco is an interesting guy. Wrote a book called Unscripted, all about entrepreneurialism, how to build businesses. He said there's 3 steps: act, assess, and adjust. That's how things really work. They're not planned in some boardroom in some obscure location, in some underground bunker. When these people talk online, say, oh, we have a plan, bullshit. I don't care what they say. All right. It's taking action, then it's assessing, then it's adjusting. That's the next step. And nobody can know precisely how that's going to evolve. But as Americans, we've done that throughout our history. And just one quick example. A lot of you are familiar with the gas station franchise Sheetz. Sheetz started, I think it was dispensing milk to local farmers in the Midwest. That's how it started. Okay. These things begin one way and they end a very different way. So act, assess, adjust.
All right. Next question is from William Cooper. Why do people think Republicans and conservatives are anything but program losers for containment of real change? I think this is a kind of a spiritual question, because confronting hard truths, especially that you have devoted your life to, that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And it's a lot easier to just keep going with those and try to validate the world around you based on your existing worldview. Changing your perception, I mean, that's really what is difficult. People also want to trust in the system. It reassures them that there's order, that there will be order, that there is justice. And that's hard to shake people of. I mean, that's what we all grew up thinking America was. This is an identity issue. Do you want to answer?
I think that's all true. And I promise I'll be brief this time. The fundamental issue that I see on the right, and what is the right? It's essentially conservatism. And I think it was Gary Wills who said decades ago, the problem with conservatives is that they're trying to conserve an order that they don't actually like. This is true. We are not conservatives. And right. Conservatism is very admirable. It's virtuous in the sense that it pays homage to the past. But we're in a different world now, folks. This is a different landscape. And so the issue with our side is a bankruptcy of imagination, a lack of imagination, of creative thinking. I'm going to build on this later in the show too, but an example of what I'm talking about. As Rebecca knows, I prefer Star Wars to Star Trek. She likes Star Trek. She's big into the Next Generation, in part because she's a dork and I'm cool. Let's be clear about that. But Star Wars is a myth, whereas Star Trek is science fiction. And to me, it's the myth that's more powerful. But as powerful as Star Wars is, as impactful, as momentous as it is, iconic culturally, George Lucas couldn't get film made. Script after script after script. You know what? I'm not interested until he had a graphic designer illustrate what the story was all about.
Right.
It's really a space opera. Okay. In other words, again, it's the imagination. We will win provided we let go to some degree of the past, of the Constitution, of the two-party system, of the founders, and we reorganize with absolute clarity based on what we see and experience today. That's where the solution set's going to be. And yeah, there are templates we can use. I've talked about the Manhattan Project. Bet you haven't heard anybody else mention that. Of course not, because that has nothing to do with politics. I'm not a politico. I don't care who's elected in the fall, as you guys know, but it's a different way of thinking. And the Manhattan Project itself was something this country had never done before. We're in the same predicament.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. All right. Thank you, William. Let's do Raven America. Imagine paying off your credit cards by opening new credit cards with exponentially higher limits. Eventually, the minimum monthly payment exceeds your income. Imagine counterfeiting to make these payments, debasing your money. Now imagine you're a metaphor for every country today. I know this wasn't a question, but I still wanted to bring it to light because I thought that this was illuminating in its simplicity. This is something that people are not. Cameron really tries to drive this point home. And it relates to the last question, like why do people trust these institutions? I feel like it is not sufficiently recognized that we are at a just a critical point of financial insolvency. And that is going to drastically change our direction and how we behave in future, because there are going to be so many moving parts. It's going to be economic, which of course affects people's quality of life, and that creates discontent, which is going to fuel the movement. Now, it's going to be an erratic change. This energy is going to be erratic. And I think, I don't want to speak for Cameron, but I think that that's one of the reasons that this in real life thing is so important, because we have to channel these frenetic energies appropriately, or the energy will be lost. It'll dissipate. It'll go into things that don't matter, that don't seek change. Do you have anything you want to say about this? I feel like that was so articulate.
Yes, it was spot on. Two things. In part, the answer to the last question mirrors this answer. People assume that the future equals the past.
Right, exactly.
It's a failure of imagination. They assume that the financial crisis that we face, which is gaining momentum by the week, and I think is about to climax in some kind of a perfect storm between the fall equinox and the spring equinox. And I'll expound upon why I think that is in just a moment. But however, whatever this crisis unearths is going to be like nothing we've ever seen before, because the world today, as I said a moment ago, is completely changed. We've never had a world in which there is tremendous distribution of power, monetary power in China, in Europe, in the United States, mass population around the world, trade routes that are being redirected, reorganized as we speak, multiple wars happening without clear, decisive breaks in regional order or reorganization. I would say a crisis in multiple blocks of civilization. Probably haven't heard other people say that, but it's true. Islam is going through a crisis as we speak. You're seeing the emergence of a new leadership in the Middle East under the banner of Shia Islam, in my opinion, that being led by Iran and probably Shia proxies across the region. However, that does not necessarily mean a war between Shiism and Sunnism. In fact, what you could see is a consolidation. And if you know anything about the history of the Middle East, you know that that's really what that region has been governed by for most of its history, whether it was the Ottomans or the Iranians or the caliphates going back 1,000 years. I think something like that is coming. In other words, this financial crisis, it's complex and complexifying. However, what is the base layer? The base layer is not the Fed. It's not the money printer. And again, all of you assume that this will play out exactly like it did in 2008. 2008, the banks blow up, and all of a sudden the government bails them out, prints a lot of money, and we go back to sleep. That's not how this is going to go, for as many reasons. But one in particular, there was a paper that I commend to all of you. It was written by Gareth Soloway, who I think is one of the best traders in the world. You can find him on YouTube. But this is a paper that he wrote. It's called "The Gold Clock is Speeding Up." And he wrote the following, and I quote, "What the money supply model cannot see is that identical printing does more damage to confidence in a low trust world than in a high trust one. Mistrust is an accelerant, and though it is not itself a price, it can be proxied by what institutions do when they lose faith in the paper." What, if anything, are we confronting in the world today, if not a collapse of faith? Faith, not just in institutions, but in money, in institutions like marriage and social dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. The money at its core is it's a layer of trust that must be guarded. And if it's treated with neglect and abuse, it breaks. That means at this time, when the government announces that it's buying all the bonds, or it's bailing out the stock market, which is what the Japanese did some 30 years ago, it's going to have the reverse effect. That's what Gareth Soloway is telling you. That's what I'm telling you. It's not going to go the way it went in 08. And that means the end of our currency and the beginning of something new.
Absolutely. This is a good one. Okay, this is Sasha. Oh, he's from Bavaria. I don't know how to say his last name. Robmuller. I'm sorry if I've destroyed that. This is Constantine's friend. Regarding your Q&A, what is your take on the topic of the so-called Mega 2.0 without Israel around Tucker Carlson and company, and the speculation about Tucker running for president? I'll start with this. I have grave concerns because I'm worried that this is going to divert energy from a more representative grassroots movement. I don't really know that Tucker represents my interests. I think that this is something of an elite movement. And I feel like we're going to fall back into the pattern of being like, well, it's better than nothing. Like we have done this before. So I'm really taking this with a grain of salt, also in terms of feasibility. But there is a lot of energy behind this. I know you have very interesting things to say about this. Go ahead, Cameron.
Look, I do not hold Tucker Carlson in disrepute the way Rebecca does. I don't find him. I'm not skeptical. I don't see anything untrustworthy in his character. Okay, and of the influential journalists, and that's what he is. He's a journalist. He's a reporter who's I think the lodestar of his career was William F. Buckley. So for those of you who don't know, William F. Buckley, I think was the co-founder, right, Rebecca, of the Weekly Standard, I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And became a celebrity journalist and inspired people like Tucker Carlson. By the way, that's what Fuentes is too. Fuentes is sort of a fusion, in my opinion, of Sarah Jesse Raphael or Jerry Springer and William F. Buckley. That's what he is, okay? And we need people like that, absolutely. And my guess is Fuentes, if he's honest, he'd probably say the same thing. That's what Tucker is too. However, Tucker pivoted in 2015. He used to have a bow tie. He grew up in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. Used to do a show called Crossfire. Used all the Republican talking points, but he saw that this country had changed fundamentally in 2015, 2016 with the emergence of Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement. And he decided to pivot in that direction. And that propelled him, that launched him into a new meteoric career on Fox, and to now being probably the most influential journalist voice in the United States, maybe in the world. And I think fundamentally Tucker agrees with what MAGA represents, which is sort of harder, right, ethnos-light conservatism. But as I said a moment ago, that's not the landscape that we're in anymore. And while Donald Trump did sort of shake up the system, he didn't break it. He can't reform it because he never understood fundamentally. Maybe he was never free to. Maybe he was always captured. He was never fundamentally clued in to what the power structure in this country is all about. And so it has consumed him. And I think that Tucker Carlson is similar, which is why he maintains these fictions about identity politics. Fundamentally, he is a conservative. And for reasons that we've already covered, that kind of paradigm is dead.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. This is from Bing Fredrickson. Have your parents informed your current politics? Did you drag them from their boomer Civnat conservatism? I talk a lot about how I've red pilled my parents. It's been a mixed bag. You know, it's hard to be older and then to realize that most of the things that you believed were a lie. I think it's been really hard on my mom. I don't know that she was ever a Civnat conservatist or conservative. So I kind of reject that qualification. But in the same way that I've informed her politics, her upbringing of me has informed my politics. So what about you?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. And at some point, I really need to sit down and flesh this out in some detail. Maybe in a video at some point. Maybe in a collaborative video. I don't know. We'll have to see. But I never went through the red pill experience. I grew up in a household that was, as I describe it, an incubator. And I'll tell you why. My father was not raised by the greatest generation. He was raised by the generation before. in part because there was some family separation early on. But the short of it is he was raised by his grandfather. And his mother was very politically active, was a big supporter for Richard Nixon. Again, a sort of conservative, incorporated, mainstream kind of activist. But his grandfather was not. He had seen the world pre-World War One, and that world was very, very different. You have to remember that pre-World War One, that was largely before you had the masses of waves of Southern and East Europeans that came to the United States. I mean, it was a WASP country. The men that we sent to pointlessly die in World War One, in many respects, were some of our best people. I mean, that war was a total disaster on a scale that we can only abstract today. To understand it, you have to read Hemingway. You have to read Fitzgerald. You have to go back and read some of their literature. And what you will learn when you do, when you get beneath the surface, is this tremendous sadness and despair and nihilism. You think people are nihilistic today? Go back and read T.S. Eliot, and you'll see. I think it was called The Wasteland. You'll see the macabre, the disturbance that World War One was, because it destroyed the European order, the Victorian era, the virtues, the sort of apotheosis, according to, I think, most, that European civilization had achieved.
Right.
A kind of unity and solidarity and a belief in progress. World War One destroyed all of that. It really did. And you could argue that World War II was the mopping up operation for as many reasons. Anyway, that sort of Victorian culture was how I was raised. And it was completely against the grain. That's why I guess I am who I am in many ways. So I didn't deal with the red pill because early on I knew what was really going on. I knew at 18 years old why we were going into Iraq. I didn't have to figure that out like Lucas Gage and some of these other people. It wasn't a revelation I knew. However, I had to deal with the consequences of that. I had to deal with a lot of peers who resented, disliked, did not understand, lashed out at a lot of my views because they didn't really understand. They were naive, or perhaps they thought that the institutions knew better, these kinds of things. So I was extremely isolated, and it was very difficult. So for my parents who lived through the 60s, 50s, and 60s, in which they saw an inversion and they had to deal with that, for me, it was watching all of my peers, my classmates, military, etc., gradually lose faith, lose confidence, lose trust, not just in the military, but in women, in marriage. I saw it. And it was hard to know that the train wreck was coming. I mean, you guys, I think out there, you deal with this. Most of you know that what we're saying on this program is right, that we're headed for the shit because we are, and nothing's going to stop that train. That's hard. It's very hard because you feel powerless. And that's how I felt for so long. But you have to press through that. You have to overcome that and accept that actually it may be for the best. And that's not some naive Panglossian perspective either. It simply is the nature of the world that we live in. And ultimately, it's anchored to one thing, faith. Mm-hmm. It all comes back to that. Again, I'll build on that later. Anyway, back to you.
All right. Let's see. What's a good list? This is Daniel. What's a good list of books you two would recommend to read, whether it be political or philosophical? Also, outside of Israel, what is another country that is a threat and not just some economic competitor fear-mongered by the media? Oh, that's a very interesting question. The list of books, this is going to take let's take this part by part. The list of books that informed my worldview the most, the Federalist Papers, Twilight of the Idols. That was pivotal for me. I'll stop with those. This is a long question. Go ahead, Cameron.
Yeah, I have a whole list. I have actually, I'm sure Rebecca's not surprised to hear this, but I actually have a list of everything I've ever read. I don't have the articles that I've read. I never cataloged them, but all the books for the most part I've got. And it's not. I think it's around 1,000, something like that, 500 to 1,000. It's not. believe me, I know people that have read thousands, and I'm not there. I'm actually a slow reader, and I take my time, and I often go back and read and reread books over and over again. But I will give you guys a book today that I happen to be rereading. It's called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment, but I'll give you that now. If you're interested in the comments in seeing my list, maybe I'll consider distributing it. So let me know.
And the next question, what other country, well, I didn't even know the answer to this, outside of Israel. I'm so focused on Israel that I'm like, I don't even know the answer to this.
The answer to this question is Mexico.
Oh, of course. Talk about Mexico, Scott. I don't think we ever got to that deep dive on the backlash where we were going to talk about the threat of Mexico. Maybe now's a good time to unpack this a bit.
We did a little bit because when Fuentes was on Piers Morgan, I talked a little bit about the Cuban lobby, and I talked about Rubio. You probably vaguely remember that. I talked about the upper class Creoles and the Spanish Empire, and so forth, and what Rubio and Ted Cruz essentially represent is an effort to revitalize the viceroy, that is the imperium of old Spain, to govern the masses of Amerindians the way that the European colonialists did in old times, really until the early 1800s. Our historic enemy in this country is Mexico.
Yeah.
Mexico. We fought multiple wars against them. Remember, Texas fought against Mexico. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Alamo and Sam Houston. There's a lot of history there. But in any case, that was one. Then we fought the Mexican-American War, which allowed us to manifest destiny and conquer both coasts, to unify our dominion over North America. So that history goes back to the 19th century, and it represents a kind of civilizational fault line. However, in more recent times, the bulk of the immigrants who've come to this country and pose nothing less than an existential threat to its national identity, as the great Samuel Huntington wrote about in his last book before he died, Who Are We? That is Mexico. And if we're going to turn around this country, that necessitates a confrontation with that nation, because the majority of the Mexicans who are here in the United States are not American at all. They are Mexican nationals. And this is well documented. There was a Pew Research study done, I want to say in 2011, don't quote me on that. I think it was called Between Two Worlds, the coming of age of young Latinos in the United States. What it proved is that any even hint of assimilation in the Hispanic community was virtually zero. It was nothing. And furthermore, that there wasn't even a Latino bloc per se, but that this entire demographic, and remember, there's many different kinds of these folks. And I've been to Mexico, I speak Spanish, I know that culture, and I've been across Latin America as well, as Rebecca knows. They tend to be very patriotic people. They tend to have a lot of fever in ways that blacks, for example, don't. The sort of Africanization of black culture that started in the 1960s, maybe the Islamization of it, which is something Malcolm X tried to push, that never really sunk deep roots in the black community. Never really did.
Yeah.
The Latinos are different. And that's why, if you go back to 2015, Donald Trump scheduled a rally, I think it was in Chicago, which is, I think, outside of LA, the largest concentrations of Mexicans in the United States. They had to shut down the rally because there were just phalanxes of Mexican protesters out there with flags chanting Viva Mexico. Okay. We are going to have a war with Mexico, not just because of immigration, but also because of the cartels. And we are going to have to deal with the cartels. And there are ways to deal with that problem. It requires the US military. It requires creating a demilitarized zone, probably 20 to 30 miles inland, so that all these border states, which are cities that are dysfunctional, I'm talking about Juarez, I'm talking about Tijuana, we're going to have to expel by force the cartels in those areas. And that means a declaration of war. Now, we can come to terms with the cartels as well. We just have to draw a line and say this far and no farther will you go. Because the fact of the matter is that Mexico today is essentially reverting back to what it was in pre-Columbian times, before the Spaniards arrived, before Cortez lands in the Yucatan Peninsula. And remember, when Cortez lands, and he lands with like 500 guys, he conquers most of Mexico, not so much because of European supremacy, but because he unified with all of these various Amerindian tribes that were being systematically brutalized by the Aztecs, among others. You know, the more powerful blocks inside Mexico, with a kind of violence, a kind of death cult that we're all only now beginning to see with the cartels. That's what it exists in Mexico. That's what historically has governed it, and we've got to deal with it. And we have to do, ironically, something very similar to what the Yankees did, to what Americans did, our Anglo ancestors did in the 19th century. We're going to have to demilitarize, push through military force and power back the borders and expel as many of these people as we can, because they have nothing to do with our culture or our identity.
Thank you for that. This is from Nathan. Thoughts on a pro-white APAC or NRA-style lobbying group legal fund that will fight to secure our people's rights? Does it exist? Where can we start? I find any attempt to use the system distasteful, because I just don't believe that there is any systemic response that we can use to further our cause. Does that mean that I'm right? I don't know, probably not, but I just don't really see this as a feasible way to achieve actual true power, because that's what we always talk about. Like, where do you find power? How do you get power? How do you deploy it? Do I think that like white APAC would legitimize our movement in a social way? Probably. And maybe that will give us some more power, but I don't think the forming of the organization would really do that much. I don't think it would be that effective.
Two things on this. One, the way that American society functions is you have to demonstrate, and Rebecca is going to, she's going to grimace when I say this, but you have to demonstrate a minimum viable product. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you're going to scale an organization, if you're going to attract investment, you need to demonstrate total addressable market. You need to demonstrate buy-in. You need to show that there is real grassroots organic support for this kind of nationalistic movement. Now, I am quite confident, not just based on anecdotal events or accounts up in New York City, but frankly, based on the level of urgency and the emergency, frankly, that we're going to face in short order, that more than a few folks out there are privy to. And when I say a few folks, I'm talking about average people. I'm talking about people that are living paycheck to paycheck. I'm talking about Main Street. I'm not talking about the people in the citadels of power. Most of them have no idea what's coming at all, and they're not prepared for it, despite what you've heard, okay? But we have to demonstrate that there is a significant market for that product. Then the money will come. It will. The investment will come. That's one. And you can see now, how do you demonstrate the minimum viable product? With an event.
Yep. That
attracts a lot of people, that is well organized, that is professional, that has a coherent message, that is cultural as well as political, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's one. Second is, we need an ARC fund. We need an ARC fund. What do I mean by that? We are going to experience some kind of financial heart attack. Those are Ray Dalio's words, not mine. Ray Dalio founded Bridgewater. He's one of the most successful and iconic investors in the history of Wall Street. His words, not mine. He's exactly right. And by the way, this collapse of the yen that's happening in Japan and the backroom deals that Besson is doing to patch it up, what is that? That's a fire alarm in an elementary school.
Yep.
Get out. Get out now. Now, why do I say ARC fund? Because this country is going to need reconstruction. What did we do for Europe after the war? Created the Marshall Fund, essentially, right? The Marshall Program. That's what we're going to have to do in the United States, and that's going to demand a lot of capital. And I think it is out there, but it needs to be structured as a kind of sovereign wealth fund. Again, it will be and can be enabled by demonstrating the minimum viable product at a kind of white Woodstock, which is the motivation for what we're doing. Okay. It all works together, but this is action in the real world. You're talking about real solutions now that demand concentrated, organized effort, vision, and execution, and something else, timing. And I happen to think that the timing is right for all of this because of the emergency that I just outlined, which I think is imminent.
Yep. K-Max says, what's the widest thing you and your co-host like, music, food, or anything else? Movie or book-wise too. The widest thing. I love Jane Austen. That's pretty white. Anne of Green Gables.
It's just
Yeah.
Jane Austen.
I like hipster culture. I like
Yeah, you do.
coffee and bicycles and handlebar mustaches, and I like folk
Bluegrass.
music. Yeah, folk music. Sierra Farrell. Yeah, I think those are all pretty white. Classical music, of course.
Swing dresses.
Yes. What about you?
Can I say yes? Here's what I'm going to recommend to all of you. If you have the means at some point in your life, what you should do is you should get on a plane and you should fly to Vienna, Austria. And when you get to Vienna, Austria, you need to take a train and you go to the Central Cemetery. And when you go to the Central Cemetery, you will see a pantheon of some of the great men, particularly composers, icons of what we call classical music, but really it's just Western music. Decorated, celebrated, memorialized in a kind of grandiosity that is truly moving. And specifically, you'll see Beethoven's tomb, and people will frequently go and they'll drop a wreath or they'll leave a little note. The Strauss father and son are there, all of the greats. So when you go and you see all of these things, there will be a kind of resonance. There is a kind of connection that directly communicates, in my opinion, at a very spiritual level, what our civilization, what our people are all about. It's there in the Vienna Cemetery.
All right. Natural selectionist. Do you think white men waste too much time blaming white women for voting 53% Republican in rigged elections, where both sides are funded by AIPAC and blackmailed by Epstein types, or should we extend the blame to everyone who votes and repeal voting rights for everyone? Oh, the old WQ. Listen, women have a large share of the responsibility in this. That is absolutely true. But men have a large share in the responsibility because it is their duty to keep the women in their society in check. And once the cat got out of the bag, that was men that allowed this to happen. Okay, if we're doing the blame game, in terms of the voting patterns, yeah, I think that it's fair to blame women for the voting patterns. But do I think that they're solely responsible for like the recent direction of the country? No, because I don't think that voting really matters that much. Go ahead, Cameron.
I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Great.
I've made a lot of content about it, but I'll be brief. Frame is something that I talk about quite a bit, as Rebecca knows, and it's not well understood. What do I mean by frame? I don't just mean the picture frame. I don't mean sort of the box through which I'm talking to you as we speak. I'm talking about a kind of platform for power that allows you to garner respect or command presence from the opposite sex. Now, the manosphere, which I know has become a cringy term, but the manosphere understood early on that frame is something that is vital. It's often referred to as interpersonal dominance. An example, when you go to interview for a job and you're sitting there in your suit or your best khaki pants, maybe you're Tucker Carlson, you're wearing a bow tie. And behind the desk, seated slightly above you, and often behind them are figurines or books or whatever, is the man who has the power. And you were there essentially to supplicate to some degree because you want a job. He has frame, he has that interpersonal dominance. And so what the manosphere tried to reconcile was, okay, men are facing ever more competition. And so what they need to do is they need to create as much frame as they possibly can. You got to get rich, you got to get jacked, you got to learn game, which is a sort of an abbreviation for learning flirtation and social communication on a very advanced level, these kinds of things. And furthermore, you got to move to the right city. I mean, you have to do all of this stuff. But the fact of the matter is that frame ultimately comes from the society and the myths of society regarding men, what their hero story happens to be. And that's often memorialized in a statue. Maybe it's the national myth. Either way, those stories are designed to inform the female, hey, this is the archetype that you want. This is the kind of guy that you should subordinate yourself to or submit to. That frame is gone. And it's been gone for some time because those myths have either been hijacked or nobody believes in them anymore. And so these men that are out there that are commanding legions or in some cases literal harems, are they good men? Are these quality people? I remember Jordan Peterson saying, if a woman doesn't choose you, she's right and you're wrong. Have we seen evidence for that over the last decade? No. All of this is to say that the only way out of this is to restore that frame through power. Because ultimately, what women respect, what they will submit to, is not reason, it's not disputation, it's not a good argument, it's power, it's aesthetic. Again, the symbol, not the statue. You will get much farther with a woman in terms of your value set the less you say, not the more that you say. However, in the current environment, as this transition unfolds, no power shift has occurred yet. We're in a very dangerous time because women have absolute asymmetrical power over you. They can destroy you if they see fit. That means in the meantime, protect yourself at all times. Proceed with caution and don't challenge, particularly at a corporation, maybe in a business. I know so many men that have lost jobs because they tried to exert masculine frame in a Fortune 500 company, maybe in the government or the military. You can't do that right now. You simply cannot because the institutions have been feminized. That's why I say we have to organize outside. We have to flip the power dynamic by virtue of this shift in frame. And the harsh truth of all this, folks, is it's going to take about a decade. In the meantime, do the best you can. Try to filter out the gals that you think are toxic and proceed with caution. But there isn't much you can do because fundamentally, if you're watching our program and you share our value set, that is a frame that is not an alternative to the female frame. It is a threat. Mm-hmm. Period.
Yep. All right, let's do some supers. Thank you so much for those questions on Twitter. You guys asked excellent, thought-provoking questions. Gorilla Hand said, hey guys, when is Bad Boy Devin coming on your stream? I'm becoming suspicious that Cameron might be Devin's evil twin or vice versa. Seriously, it would be interesting having all three of you together. This is my most asked question. Cameron, this is in your court.
No, it's not. It's in yours. I'm not really familiar with, and remember folks, I don't really know about a lot of these online people. So oftentimes when people say, oh, you need to talk to Black Pill, I'm like, okay, about what? I don't know who these people are. I don't really know what he thinks. I know that Rebecca does a show with him called Outlaws. And I know that on that show, they focus on specific historical events. But outside of that, what is this thing I need to know about that I don't know?
I don't know. People think it would be an interesting discussion because you guys are diametrically opposed in terms of worldview. And so I think that they just want to see the spectacle.
Yeah. So my response is let's wait 6 months.
Okay.
Why do I say that? shit's happening. I saw a post on Instagram the other day. It said the IRA, the Irish Republican Army of old, is being reorganized, reconsolidated. Why? Because Ireland is on the precipice of a revolution. Very similar things are happening in Spain, across Europe. Now, if by way of interacting with somebody who has an opposite view, and I assume by implication that means that their view is that it's hopeless and nothing's happening, wait 6 months. What happens when the bailout of the Japanese yen doesn't work because it's not working? Then we can talk.
Good Lord. That's so loud. Thank you for that. Did you finish, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm open to talking to whomever. I do a lot of podcasts. I go on a lot of people's shows, and I am routinely inundated with messages. Oh, you don't get it. The banker's this, the bank. Okay, that's fine. I'm happy to have that discussion. But as Rebecca knows, I think action is greater than disputation. Right? I think myth is greater than science fiction or rationalism. So what's the point of the exercise? He has his point of view. If you favor that, then you can migrate that way. I have mine. I think it will be solved or resolved empirically in the real world. But I guess fundamentally speaking, what all of you have to ask yourself is as follows. Do you want to subscribe? And let me be very careful with my words here because I don't know what this person believes or says, except to say that when people talk about the black pill, which I think is his moniker, what they mean is that it's finished. Essentially, the whole circumstance of the West has already been decided and there isn't much we can do about it. I strongly disagree with any philosophy, I've said this repeatedly, that discourages action in favor of hopelessness. Hopelessness is a disease. And I'll say one other thing about this. Something very destructive is happening online, and specifically in Rebecca's space. It's her space, it's not mine. People are beginning to wake up in the West. Things are beginning to happen. But the OGs that got famous 10 years ago by talking about the JQ, maybe they talked about the banking class, they're losing market share because the narrative that they've been, monetizing for so long, which is essentially palace intrigue, Rothschild banking subterfuge, well, that's being overtaken by things in the real world. And so they're doubling down, and the conspiracy grows ever deeper and deeper and deeper. So they come up with a new thread after a new thread. Be very skeptical of people whose advocacy, if you will, aligns with their business interest. Same thing is true with a lot of these finfluencers, the financial influencers. Sometimes the best thing to do, folks, is not to trade. But if they are traders and they're monetizing your trading activity, they're going to tell you need to trade. So just remember who's selling you these ideas. But no matter what I say, no matter what comes of this program and these events, you have to decide fundamentally, do you accept a philosophy that favors action or not?
Right.
Or action.
Yes, absolutely. Murmur Dragon, do you guys think that we should stop with democracy? Between AA and Devin, I've come to understand history as well as past to present power. It seems to me monarchy would just be more effective. I've always thought that, but with the history of America and the quality of the people and what we've known about Americanism and how true it is to our identity, I'm not sure if we could ever institute a governmental system like monarchy in a meaningful way. That being said, when there is chaos, authoritarianism of one sort or another tends to emerge. Cameron.
This is a false frame. This is the bankruptcy of the right. It's either monarchy or it's democracy. If things don't work today, it's because of the political system of yesterday. There are many variables that have brought us to this point. Democracy may be one of them. It may be the Constitution. The Constitution is an anachronistic document written over 250 years ago, or over 200 years ago, not quite 250. That's the Declaration of Independence. I think it was ratified in 1789. That document addressed a nation that was radically different, essentially outlined an America that was closer to Switzerland, Jeffersonian republics that were kind of like cantons. Are we a great power or are we not? If we're a great power, then we are in the throes of a succession, a turnover, an interregnum. That has less to do with democracy or monarchy. It's a transition. And when transitions occur, there's a consolidation of power. There's a centralization of power. Why? Because you have an emergency. And the ancients, who in many ways were more, what's the right word? They were more sagacious, let's go with that, than we are today. The Roman Constitution had a condition. It was called senatus ultimum. And when there was an emergency, often it involved barbarians at the gates, they dissolved the Senate and they appointed two proconsuls, one who would rule from Rome, and the other who would take charge of the army to destroy the existential threat. You were in a state of exception. We are entering the state of exception because the government is simply not equipped to deal with a very different country facing extremely complex problems that rise to the level of a crisis of national identity and necessitates something new. Again, you haven't heard anybody say many things like this because they're all politicos. So they think, oh, well, it must have a political solution. Not necessarily. Does Social Security work anymore? No. What about Medicare and Medicaid? No, they really don't. They're all bankrupt organizations. Is that because of a conspiracy? No, it's because they're old. The Fed is a corrupt institution. I don't think there's any question about it, but it's also an old institution and it's trying to deal with a monetary problem, a kind of Pandora's box that is just simply ill-equipped to deal with because it's 2026.
Yeah.
It's not 1913 anymore. Okay. So again, set aside democracy or monarchy. What is coming in this country is going to be groundbreaking. It's going to look different. It's going to be organized differently. And the characters, the personality types that manifest it, well, they're going to be very different than what you've come to expect in the past, because that's just the nature of the game, the nature of life that we live.
Thank you for that. Let's see. I think we've got a few more. We do. I lost my place. Sorry. Bad podcaster. Did I read this? Nick Galt. If U.S. does, YCC buys its own treasuries like Japan and debt grows, why can't it go on forever? K-shaped economics keeps inflation low and efficiency gains keep commodities low. What breaks us? I assume this is a question for Cameron.
Yeah, and I can answer it. If the premise of your statement is true, and many of you believe this, I hear this all the time, and I'm gonna prove you all wrong right now in one fell swoop. Okay. Well, the government is the reserve currency. It can just print and print and print and print. Okay. Why bail out Japan? Now, the official pretext is to preserve the value of the yen so that there isn't a currency crisis that then spreads. Dig a little deeper, and what you'll find is actually they're worried that the Japanese might sell their treasury bonds. Why would they care? Who cares? Why doesn't the Fed just buy them all? Why doesn't the Japanese central bank, the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, why don't they just buy them all? They own 50%, buy the rest. Because of what Gareth Soloway said earlier in the program. Because the base layer isn't the printer, it's the confidence. It's the trust. And there is a threshold wherein if you print a little too much, whoops, got to get my money out. Now, I don't precisely know where that threshold is. Nobody does. It's imprecise. It is a function of human fear and greed, okay? But we're close. And that's why they bought yen using euros to conceal the fact that really it's a dollar bailout. It's also why they bailed out Argentina in 2025. It's also why they bailed out UAE in April. Did you notice those things? Why do we care? We're not beholden to UAE. We want them to own treasuries because the Fed knows, they know, this part they know, that they can only buy but so much. They can only print but so much. And they have used that printing press. It's at capacity. The guy down there printing, his arm is tired. He's running out of gas. There's no light down there. They don't feed him much. This is where we are. Again, if your thesis is correct, none of it matters. They can just print into oblivion. Final note on this. There was a Scotsman named John Law. And John Law told a French king in the 18th century named Louis XV the very same thing that you guys are telling me. Hey, just print a new currency. And he did. And they did. They printed and printed and printed. And they even manufactured stories about gold mines, and they hired, I've talked about this before, they hired actors to play miners and paraded them through the streets of Paris. Oh, see, we found new mines, to prop up the currency that John Law said, hey, you can just make up the currency. You can manufacture, you can stockpile monopoly money in the banks. Nobody will notice. It failed. And here's the other side of the story that a lot of people don't know. In 1789, when the French Revolution started, and eventually you get, these various revolutionary governments that then take power, they make all the same mistakes. They do it all over again. And some of the people that were at those estates general, some of the people that were sitting on the directory and so forth, they had lived through the period of John Law, and he did it anyway. Learn from history, folks. The printing press is not a panacea, and it really hasn't worked in this country either.
Right.
That's why we're bailing out Japan.
El Franco, I'm a Puerto Rican Catholic who's pro-white ally, and I'm curious as to what can be done to end Puerto Rico's American territorial limbo, which causes my people to move en masse to the mainland and worsen the demographics. That's such an interesting question. I need to think about this. What can be done?
Well, Puerto Rico should not be able to vote. It should not be an official
Of
state.
course.
And that's the solution, right? The issue is that all the safeguards, all the governors that we once had to maintain the demographic balance, they're gone. And so, hordes of Dominicans and Puerto Ricans have taken up residence in Miami. A lot of them are in New York, and now they've spread beyond because they're being replaced now, ironically, by the Mamdani wave, the Indians that are coming in, or the Muslims, right? Whether they're from Pakistan, the Middle East, maybe they're South Asians. It's a mess. But fundamentally speaking, all of this is creating this identity disaggregation. And the white population is being forced by hook or by crook to re-nationalize, to tribalize for our own survival. And everybody knows where that line is. It's the color line. That ultimately will facilitate this expulsion. It's not going to be a re-migration. That's a fantasy. I know that Martin Sellner and that Dutch girl are talking about that. Look, that's not going to happen, at least not as a political program. You're going to have a breakdown of state, and then you're going to get mass expulsions. Because the extreme solution, as I used to say in the backlash, will be the only one left. The government won't permit anything else, and they will fall as a result. And then there will be a reorganization, which, as I said a moment ago, is what's beginning to happen in Ireland. And I think it'll happen across the continent as well. So all that is to say, the problem to some degree is a solution. But Puerto Rico is not America. It needs to be stripped of its citizenship or its voting rights, these kinds of things. And I suspect, depending on how bad things get in this country, that will happen.
All right, let's see. Thank you. See me rolling. I appreciate that. Floppy, I think this is the last one. Floppy Disk Energy. I much prefer Cameron to Devin as your co-host. That being said, would all three of you ever get together for a show? I'd love to see Cameron take Devin to task on certain topics. I do think that we have answered that sufficiently. So my apologies. And then last one, a big donation from Clempath. So much of our cultural heritage is within cities, museums, art, beautiful architecture, etc. With the coming restructuring collapse, how do you believe these invaluable relics will be preserved or lost? How do we save and preserve them? I mean, we can do this through private funding. I mean, this is a philanthropic effort, and I think that white people care about preserving their history. I think that they care about beauty and about culture. And I think that without any kind of outside forces, that we will find it within ourselves to do this as a philanthropic effort.
How do you destroy a myth with a new myth? You need a new myth. And what is the mechanism by which you do that? The great Nietzsche told us. You mentioned Twilight of the Gods. What did Nietzsche say? For a temple to be erected, a temple must be destroyed. Memorials, statues, a lot of these things, they're sort of distant if you really don't have any context. You know that they have some kind of symbolic meaning, but you don't really know why. It's there. It's sort of a feeling. I mean, I remember I was in Paris and I was meandering about. I think I had just finished a date or something like that. And I stopped someone, I looked up, and I was beneath this statue. And the statues in Paris, as I think you know, Rebecca, they're just, that the French in particular, the Russians too, by the way, their memorials are just spectacular. And they are extremely diligent regarding maintaining them. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and I looked up and it was Danton. And Danton was perhaps the greatest orator of the French Revolution. And I forget exactly what he said when he died. He was guillotined, they chopped his head off. But he essentially told the crowd to go fuck themselves. I mean, the man had tremendous courage. He was a lunatic. He was a communist. But that fire was there, and you can see it in the memorial. And it was in the spectacle, the theater of that revolution. And make no mistake, and this is something that's missing in the online in this country in some measure because of our lack of understanding of the past, a lack of connectivity with our forebears across the pond there in the Atlantic. Theater, aesthetic, provenance, these things communicate. I saw The Odyssey recently, Christopher Nolan's film. I don't know if you saw it yet, Rebecca.
No.
It's just garbage. It's, and I'll tell you why. It's, there's so many problems with it, not just in terms of reproducing the story. And I'm not an expert on the Odyssey. I've read the Iliad. I've never really read the Odyssey in great detail, so I cannot speak to those inaccuracies. But they're there. Obviously, there's some historical inaccuracies and so forth. But the truth is that film is soulless. It was sort of de-spiritualized. Okay. And obviously, we know why, because in order to get made, the Jewish producers, the financiers, they demand it. However, there's one character in the film that's memorable, that audiences have really flocked to. And if you go online, you'll see lots of videos. It's Agamemnon. And the reason is because of Agamemnon's armor, his helmet, his walk. And the guy's in the movie for 5 minutes and he has maybe 10 lines. That's it. It's the power. And actually, when I saw the film, I took a picture of it, sent it to Rebecca. Rebecca probably thinks I'm a lunatic, but I said frame, aesthetic, theater. And just to illustrate this point real quick, if I may, Rebecca, this is a great book, Citizens, about the French Revolution. Just listen to this one part because I think this does an excellent job, assuming I can find it, of describing the theater, the symbology and its effect. This is why the ancients built the Parthenon. It's why Jacques-Louis David memorialized the French Revolution with neoclassical architecture, and art and so forth. There was much to provoke popular anger in 1830. Okay, so he's talking not about the French Revolution in 1789, but a subsequent one. A trade depression with its automatic high bread prices and unemployment had caused groups of angry artisans to assemble in the Saint Antonin to listen to the journalists and orators denounce the government. But what triggered their emotions and fired their determination was the exposure of revolutionary mementos like holy relics. The tricolor that was flown again from Notre Dame. Okay, and the tricolor, the red, white, and blue colors of France, of the revolution, right? That symbolism, that's what moves people. That's what's missing in our movement, where everybody sits around and says, "Oh, this is my clever take," and "Oh no, it's this group of Jews in the world." Okay, fine. But we have to move beyond that, and we have to regain that sense of theatricality, so that we can demonstrate that minimum viable product, et cetera, et cetera. One final thing, I mentioned this a moment ago, the book Psychotherapy. Just real quick, it's Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. Just listen to this part here. He told me that Dr. Maltz was a plastic surgeon who figured out that a person cannot rise above how he sees himself. A person cannot rise above how he sees himself. Okay? Our future, he said, is controlled by a mental blueprint we have inside our subconscious mind. And it dictates where we think we belong. Trying to achieve without expanding your self-image doesn't lead to lasting positive change. Self-image, archetype, aesthetic, Agamemnon, real world. That's what moves men and nations. And it will do likewise in the United States. And that's how we recover the artifacts of old, with new myths and the conflicts that they produce.
What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you all so much for your thoughtful questions. We truly appreciate it. This is The Reset. We do this show every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can find all of Cameron's links below. You can follow me at blondes_tweets. I do another show with Devin Stack on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time called Outlaws. Please check that out on his Rumble, my YouTube. Follow my other YouTube channel at Rebecca Hargraves 1. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.